The syringe slipped from Claudia's fingers like her memories were slipping from her mind. As Dr. Hassan watched her pupils dilate under the laboratory's harsh fluorescent lights, she tried to remember why she'd wanted to resist his instructions. The experimental drug coursing through her veins made defiance feel abstract, almost impossible to conceptualize. She could still think, still form words, still understand what was happening to her, but the chemical rewiring of her brain made compliance feel like the most natural response to any request, no matter how degrading or dangerous. 8 weeks earlier, everything had seemed like the perfect solution to problems that were suffocating her family in Bogotá. Claudia Vargas had been working as a nurse in one of Colombia's most understaffed hospitals, earning wages that couldn't cover her diabetic father's medication while supporting her younger sister's university education. When the email arrived from the International Medical Research Foundation, offering $50,000 for participation in a groundbreaking pharmaceutical trial, it felt like divine intervention answering her desperate prayers. The research opportunity was presented as cutting-edge work on neurological medications that could revolutionize treatment for depression, anxiety, and PTSD. The foundation needed bilingual participants who could provide detailed feedback on cognitive and emotional changes during the testing process. Claudia's medical background made her an ideal candidate, they explained, and her fluency in both Spanish and English was essential for documenting the drug's effects across different cultural contexts. The documentation supporting the trial looked impressively legitimate. The International Medical Research Foundation had an official website showcasing previous breakthroughs, testimonials from participants who contributed to medical advances, and endorsements from physicians whose credentials checked out when Claudia researched them online. The trial protocol had been approved by multiple ethics boards, and participants would receive comprehensive medical care throughout the testing period. Dr. Ahmad Hassan, the lead researcher, was particularly convincing during their video interviews. He held advanced degrees from prestigious universities, had published papers in respected medical journals, and spoke passionately about developing treatments that could help millions of people suffering from mental health conditions. His manner was professional but warm, exactly what Claudia expected from someone dedicated to healing rather than harm. The financial terms were generous beyond anything Claudia had ever encountered. $50,000 for 8 weeks of participation, with all expenses paid including travel to the research facility in Texas, accommodation in a comfortable residential unit, and comprehensive medical monitoring throughout the trial. The money would transform her family's circumstances, funding her father's treatments and her sister's education, while establishing financial security they'd never known. The visa process was handled entirely by the Foundation's legal team, who explained that medical research participants received special documentation that expedited their entry into the United States. The paperwork was complex but professionally managed, with Foundation representatives handling every aspect of immigration compliance. Claudia's role was simply to provide basic personal information and submit to preliminary health screenings. The journey to America felt like stepping into a future she'd only dreamed about during her most optimistic moments. The Foundation's representatives met her at Dallas Airport with professional courtesy and luxury transportation to the research facility. During the drive through affluent Texas neighborhoods, Dr. Hassan explained how her participation would contribute to medical breakthroughs that could help patients worldwide. The Neuroscience Research Institute was located in a modern building that looked exactly like what Claudia expected from cutting-edge medical research. Glass facades reflected the Texas sun. Sophisticated equipment was visible through laboratory windows, and staff members moved with the purposeful efficiency of people engaged in important scientific work. Everything suggested legitimacy and professional competence. Her residential accommodation was surprisingly luxurious for what she'd assumed would be basic housing. The private apartment included a bedroom, sitting area, kitchenette, and bathroom that were more comfortable than anywhere she'd ever lived. Dr. Hassan explained that participant comfort was essential for accurate data collection, as stress or discomfort could influence the drug's effects and compromise research validity. The first week involved extensive baseline testing to establish her neurological and psychological state before beginning the experimental medication. Brain scans, blood work, cognitive assessments, and detailed interviews created comprehensive documentation of her mental and physical condition. The thoroughness was reassuring, suggesting the research team was genuinely committed to participant safety and scientific rigor. Dr. Hassan explained the trial protocol in detail during their orientation sessions. The experimental drug was designed to enhance neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections and adapt to changing circumstances. Early testing had shown promising results for treating treatment-resistant depression, but they needed data on how the medication affected healthy individuals to understand its full therapeutic potential. The medication itself was administered through daily injections that Dr. Hassan performed personally, explaining that dosage precision was critical for both safety and efficacy. The drug had a distinctive blue tint and a slight metallic smell that Claudia found unpleasant, but Dr. Hassan assured her these characteristics were normal for experimental pharmaceuticals containing novel molecular compounds. Initial effects were subtle but noticeable. Claudia experienced enhanced emotional regulation, finding herself less reactive to stress and more optimistic about future possibilities. Her sleep improved, her appetite stabilized, and she felt generally more content than she had in years. The positive changes seemed exactly like what Dr. Hassan had predicted for a medication designed to improve mental health outcomes. But by the second week, more complex changes began emerging. Claudia noticed that disagreeing with Dr. Hassan's suggestions became increasingly difficult, not because she feared consequences, but because opposition felt psychologically uncomfortable in ways she couldn't articulate. When he recommended changes to her daily routine or requested additional testing, compliance felt like the path of least resistance. The psychological alterations were accompanied by physical changes that Dr. Hassan monitored closely. Her brain scans showed increased activity in regions associated with reward processing and decreased activity in areas linked to critical thinking and impulse control. He explained these modifications as evidence that the medication was successfully enhancing neuroplasticity, though the specific changes seemed more dramatic than what she expected from his initial descriptions. Dr. Hassan's request became more personal and invasive as the trial progressed. He wanted detailed information about her relationships, sexual history, and emotional responses to various stimuli. When Claudia expressed discomfort about sharing such intimate details, he explained that psychological factors could influence the drug's neurological effects. Her reluctance to discuss personal matters gradually dissolved as compliance became psychologically easier than resistance. The turning point came during the fourth week, when Dr. Hassan introduced what he called behavioral assessments, designed to measure how the medication affected her decision-making processes. These evaluations involved scenarios where she had to choose between competing options, but the choices became increasingly uncomfortable as they progressed from abstract dilemmas to personal decisions about her own behavior and boundaries. The experimental drug's true effects became apparent as Claudia found herself agreeing to requests that her rational mind recognized as inappropriate. Dr. Hassan asked her to remove her clothing for thermal regulation studies, to participate in stress response testing that involved physical contact, and to engage in social bonding exercises that felt more like grooming than scientific research. Each time, her drug brain made compliance feel natural, while her awareness screamed warnings she couldn't act upon. The research facility's true purpose revealed itself gradually through details that only became significant in retrospect. Other participants moved through the building with the glazed compliance of people under chemical influence. The staff included individuals whose qualifications seemed questionable when examined closely. Most importantly, the research being conducted had nothing to do with treating mental health conditions and everything to do with creating chemically induced submission. Dr. Hassan's background, when investigated more thoroughly, revealed a pattern of research into mind-control substances rather than therapeutic medications. His published papers focus on compounds that could reduce resistance, enhance suggestibility, and create psychological dependence in subjects who maintain their cognitive abilities while losing their capacity for effective opposition. The International Medical Research Foundation was a front for developing drugs that could be used for human trafficking and sexual exploitation. The $50,000 had been bait to attract intelligent, educated women who would be valuable commodities in markets that prize victims who could think clearly while being unable to resist effectively. Claudia's medical background made her particularly appealing to clients who enjoyed the fantasy of corrupting healthcare professionals through chemical manipulation rather than physical force. The residential facility was actually a containment unit designed to house victims during the conditioning process. The comfortable accommodations were props to maintain psychological stability, while the experimental drugs rewired their neural pathways. The brain scans that Dr. Hassan had described as measuring therapeutic progress were actually documenting the systematic destruction of their capacity for self-determination. The other women in the facility had been recruited through similar deceptions, promises of medical trials, research opportunities, or experimental treatments that would benefit humanity while providing generous compensation. All had been gradually conditioned through drug administration that left them intellectually intact, but emotionally and psychologically incapable of sustained resistance or effective escape attempts. The experimental medication was a sophisticated compound that affected specific neurotransmitter systems responsible for willpower, critical thinking, and emotional regulation. Unlike crude date rape drugs that render victims unconscious, this substance allowed them to remain aware of what was happening while making opposition feel psychologically impossible. The effect was far more insidious than simple sedation or coercion. Dr. Hassan explained the drug's mechanism with clinical detachment as Claudia's ability to resist his explanations diminished daily. The compound increased dopamine sensitivity and reward pathways, while suppressing activity in brain regions associated with long-term planning and risk assessment. Victims could understand they were being exploited but felt overwhelmingly compelled to comply with their exploiters' demands. The business model was sophisticated and profitable beyond anything traditional trafficking could achieve. Clients paid premium prices for access to highly educated women who maintained their personalities and intelligence while being chemically incapable of effective resistance. The drug-induced compliance was more psychologically satisfying for predators than simple physical restraint, creating a market for a specific type of exploitation. The conditioning process was designed to be irreversible through careful manipulation of neuroplasticity mechanisms. Each injection strengthened neural pathways associated with submission, while weakening connections that supported independent decision-making. Dr. Hassan had perfected a chemical lobotomy that left victims functional but fundamentally altered in ways that served their traffickers' purposes. Claudia's transformation was monitored through daily assessments that documented her declining ability to resist inappropriate requests. Brain scans showed the progressive changes as her neural architecture was systematically modified to prioritize compliance over self-preservation. The scientific rigor that had initially impressed her was being used to perfect her own psychological destruction. The facility housed dozens of women in various stages of conditioning, all recruited through fake research opportunities that exploited their financial desperation or professional ambitions. Some had been told they were testing antidepressants, others believed they were contributing to Alzheimer's research, and a few thought they were helping develop treatments for addiction. All had trusted scientific institutions that turned out to be elaborate fronts for human trafficking. The clients who patronized Dr. Hassan's operation were wealthy individuals who paid extraordinary sums for experiences that couldn't be obtained through conventional means. The combination of chemical compliance and retained intelligence created a form of exploitation that appealed to predators who found conscious submission more satisfying than simple overpowering of victims. Claudia's gradual loss of resistance was documented through video recordings that served both as research data and marketing material for potential clients. Her transformation from confident medical professional to chemically compliant victim was packaged as entertainment for people who found the corruption of competent women sexually arousing. The legal complexities of her situation made escape seem impossible, even if she could overcome the chemical constraints on her behavior. Her visa status made her completely dependent on the research foundation, while the experimental drugs in her system would be difficult to prove or treat if she somehow managed to contact authorities. The operation had been designed to exploit every vulnerability while providing comprehensive protection for perpetrators. Dr. Hassan revealed that the conditioning process was designed to be permanent through mechanisms that were still being refined through ongoing experimentation. The neural changes induced by the drug cocktail became self-reinforcing as modified brain chemistry made resistance increasingly difficult to sustain. Victims became psychologically addicted to compliance that the chemicals enforced. The other women in the facility served as warnings about the long-term effects of the conditioning process. Those who'd been there longest displayed complete psychological submission despite maintaining their intellectual capabilities. They could analyze their situation accurately, but felt overwhelmingly compelled to cooperate with any request, no matter how degrading or dangerous. The research that Dr. Hassan conducted was genuinely advancing scientific understanding of neuroplasticity and behavioral modification, though his applications were purely criminal rather than therapeutic. His papers, published under false names and institutional affiliations, contributed to legitimate research while being developed specifically to enhance human trafficking and sexual exploitation techniques. The brain changes documented through Claudia's scans showed the systematic destruction of neural networks that had taken her entire lifetime to develop. The confident, independent nurse who'd arrived from Colombia was being systematically erased and replaced with someone who looked identical but could no longer access the psychological resources that had once defined her personality. The financial incentive that had originally attracted Claudia to trial was revealed as irrelevant once the conditioning process was complete. Dr. Hassan had no intention of paying participants, since chemically compliant victims couldn't effectively demand compensation or report fraud. The $50,000 existed only as bait to attract victims who might otherwise be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. The sophisticated deception extended to every aspect of the operation, from the fake research credentials to the elaborately constructed facility that looked precisely like what victims expected from legitimate medical research. Every detail had been designed by people who understood exactly how to exploit the trust that medical professionals placed in scientific institutions. Claudia's family continued to believe she was participating in groundbreaking research that would benefit humanity while providing financial security for their future. The emails and phone calls they received were carefully scripted to maintain this fiction, while preventing them from becoming suspicious about her extended absence from Colombia. The psychological manipulation extended beyond the immediate victims to their support networks. The drug's effects on Claudia's brain were monitored through sophisticated imaging technology that documented the precise mechanisms through which her autonomy was being systematically destroyed. The brain scans showed decreasing activity in regions associated with self-advocacy and increasing sensitivity in areas that process social rewards, creating a neurological profile optimized for exploitation. Dr. Hassan's research into mind-controlled substances represented the cutting edge of neuroscience applied to criminal purposes. His understanding of brain chemistry allowed him to create psychological slavery through pharmaceutical means, developing techniques that were more subtle and effective than traditional coercion methods, while being virtually impossible to detect or reverse. The experimental compound that had initially seemed like a revolutionary treatment for mental health conditions was actually designed to create mental health problems that served traffickers' purposes. The enhanced neuroplasticity that Dr. Hassan had described as therapeutic was being used to rewire victims' brains in ways that made them more valuable as commodities in illegal markets. The daily injections continued as Claudia's resistance diminished to the point where questioning Dr. Hassan's instructions became psychologically impossible. The blue-tinted medication that had once made her feel optimistic and content now served as a chemical leash that made freedom conceptually inaccessible despite her continued awareness of her situation. The other victims in the facility had become her peer group and support system, though their interactions were carefully monitored and controlled to prevent any collaboration that might threaten the conditioning process. They shared the common experience of being highly educated women who trusted scientific institutions that turned out to be sophisticated traps designed specifically to exploit their professional backgrounds and financial vulnerabilities. The research facility operated with the efficiency of a machine designed to process independent women into chemically compliant commodities. Every aspect of the environment had been optimized to maintain the subject's psychological stability while systematically destroying their capacity for self-determination. The comfortable accommodations and professional medical care were components of a system designed to transform human agency into a marketable product. Dr. Hassan's success in developing irreversible chemical compliance had created a new category of human trafficking that appealed to clients who found traditional exploitation insufficiently sophisticated for their tastes. The ability to maintain victims' intelligence while eliminating their resistance created possibilities for exploitation that had never existed before the development of his pharmaceutical techniques. The experimental drug coursing through Claudia's system represented the culmination of research that had transformed cutting-edge neuroscience into a tool for creating the perfect victim, someone who could think clearly enough to understand what was happening to them, but who had been chemically modified to find resistance psychologically impossible. The blue-tinted medication had become the key to a prison built inside her own mind. The syringe in her hand was loaded with the same compound that already altered her brain beyond recognition, though she could no longer remember why she'd ever wanted to avoid the injection that would deepen her chemical bondage. Dr. Hassan's instructions felt like the most reasonable suggestions she'd ever heard, and compliance felt like the most natural response to his caring guidance. As the needle slipped beneath her skin and the familiar blue medication entered her bloodstream, Claudina felt the last vestiges of her independence were dissolving into the pharmaceutical solution that had become her new reality. The experimental drug that had promised to enhance her neuroplasticity had succeeded beyond Dr. Hassan's wildest expectations, transforming her from a confident medical professional into living proof that the human capacity for resistance could be chemically eliminated while leaving intelligence intact. The $50,000 that had lured her to America remained as fictional as the medical research that had supposedly justified her presence in Dr. Hassan's laboratory. But the brain changes documented in her scans were permanent modifications that would ensure she never again experienced the luxury of genuine choice or the burden of effective resistance. The side effects of the experimental medication had indeed proven to be permanent, though not in any way that resembled the therapeutic benefits she'd been promised.